Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Welcome to Dev with Excel. Alright, so in this video we shall be solving exercise exercise 3.14, which is this, right? So in the previous video we solved exercise 3.13 and we're able to fetch the data we have in our database, right? And which was displayed on the browser. Okay, so in this video we are going to be changing the back end, right? So that new numbers can be saved to the database. Also, we are asked to verify that the front end still works after the changes. Again, it says at this stage, you can ignore whether there is already a person in the database with the same name as the person you are adding. So as it stands, we are having three basic tasks to do in this exercise. First, we need to change the backend so that new numbers are saved to the database. Two, we need to verify that the front end also works with these changes. And then we need to be able to save a name even if the name is already in the database, right? Thus we can add a duplicate name, right? Okay, so let's go to the code implementation. Before that, let's go to the database and see the content we have. So from the previous video, we saw that we were able to add this data into the database, right? We did this using the front end and the back end, right? So we were able to integrate both the front end and the back end to achieve this. We added these names, Ato, Excel, and Anna. All right, so actually these names, this data was actually added to the database using the command line interface, right? So we were able to fetch this data in the previous video, which focused on just fetching data from the database. So in this video, what we want to do is instead of using the command line interface to pass data to the database, we are simply going to be using the back end and the front end, right? So we are going to make it in a way that we can add data from the front end, which is integrated to the back end, and it gets into the database. Okay, moving into the code implementation. All right, here is my VS Code. And as it is right now, we can see here that I have a setup folder for this exercise, which I titled database, which is DB step 2, right? So we can see that this is the step 2 of the PhoneBook database, right? And this setup folder, it represents the exercise. It represents the exercise 3.14, which we are currently working with. Okay, let me just scroll up to the point where we have the exercise. All right, so here is it. Okay, now let's cd into this folder. So we just do something like this, cd. Then let's run this. Then while that is happening, okay, so let's get that done. Let's make sure that this is working first. Okay, all right, connected to MongoDB. Let's confirm what we have in our .env. All right, so as we can see, this is the connection string, right, coming from the database, right? So this is the connection string we got from the Mongo Atlas, and this helps us to integrate our code to the database. So what we want to do next is going back to the instruction. It says change the backend so that new numbers are saved to the database, right? So this is our focus for now. Now let's go to the backend, and that can be found in the index.js. Let's minimize this, and then let's do the same here. All right, so currently what we have in the database is the code implementation that helps us to fetch. That's using the get method, right, to fetch data from the database. Now what we want to do here is we want to be able to post data, right, to the database. Now coming back to the material we have here, there's a part here that helps us to do that. Let's go to using database in route handlers. So when we look at this part very well, we are going to say that this part helps us to post data to the database, right? So to make things very easy for us, we could just copy this, or we can also just choose to type this all over again, right? But I choose to copy this and then paste it into the VS Code and then edit it for the database we are working with. All right, so I simply paste this. And now we are working with the endpoint slash API slash persons. So I simply just change node to persons and then change request response to a shorter form, that's res. Here we have const body equals request.body, right? So this is still okay, just that we need to remove this request and make it rec, because here we are using rec, that's REQ. And then from the schema, we can see that we are working with name and number, not content and important as it were, right? So let's change this part first, right? Let's change this part. Let's change this part to name. And then here we will be having body.name, because this is the name coming from the body, right? So this body, right? This request of body, it represents the data coming from the front end, that's from the user. So this important, we change it to number, and then we change this important here to number as well, right? So we can just remove this false. We don't need this for this logic. Okay, so let's be sure, right? Let's check what we have in the model. Okay, so here we can see that here we have the person schema here that contains the name and the number, right? That's why we have to use name and number here. If you use any other thing that is found or that is not found in the person's JS in the schema here, the code should not work well, right? So that's the idea. All right, so the next thing we want to do is, since we have name and number and we don't have content here, we have to change this content here to name. But let's be very sure of what to put here, because the instruction says, let's go back to the instruction. Let's scroll down. Okay, let's scroll up a bit. Okay, so this is size 3.12. I think I passed it already. All right, so it says change the backend so that the new numbers are saved to the database, right? So so we are going to leave this here. It also says verify that your front end still works after the changes. We are going to get into this after we are through with this part, and I think this part. Okay, so it says at this stage you can ignore whether there is already a person in the. Okay, so at this point I think we can just comment this out, or we could just leave this way. There is no harm with this, right? So we can just remove it. We can simply just say name missing, right? Name missing. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is you want to change this note here from note to person, because when we come here we have the person variable here coming from the model, right? So we are going to be using this person, right, to replace the note we have here. And then we replace this note also here with person, but here this person should be with a lowercase p. Also, we copy this person and we remove this note and paste person here, right? So instead of having saved notes here, we are simply going to have saved person, and also the same thing, we want to put saved person here as well. So here we have saved person here. Also, we have saved person here. But here we are not going to be using response.json, right? We are rather going to be using res, that's res. So let's remove this and then let's have something like this. Okay, I think with this, we've been able to get this working properly. All right, so let's save this. Let's save this. And then we want to be very sure that this is working very well with the front end. Let's go to the front end and see if this works properly. Okay, now recall that for the front end, let me maximize this. For the front end, we used a setup folder from the part 2 of this material, and that is found in the phone book, right? Phone book step 9. Now this is the setup folder we've been using for the front end so far, right? So we simply just copy this part here and we cd into it. So let's just come here and cd into this part, and then let's do npm run. So this is going to help us to run the front end React, right? Okay, so let's see what we have in the front end React. This is a React. Okay, all right. So this is what we had in the previous exercise, right? This is what the app.get is doing for us. Now let's see if we can add a new name and a new number to this. So let's give it a name. Let's say we have um John Tim, right? And then having a number of, let's say, 03-567. Let's click on add. All right, so John Tim has been added, right? So let's be very sure that this is also added to the database. Going to the database here, we have 3 data, right? Let's refresh this to see if it is added. Okay, so we are currently refreshing the data. Okay, so we can see here that we have 1 out of 4 now. That means one data has been added, right? And that data is John Tim, right? So this works fine, right? This works fine. But now, going back to the instruction again, it says verify that your front end still works after the changes. Yes, that works. And we've been able to change the backend so that new numbers are saved to the database, right? Now we can see that in our case here, not just new numbers are saved to the database, but also the name, right? That's because we don't want to save a number that does not have a name attached to it, right? I think that's reasonable enough. So if you still choose, or if you want to follow along with this exercise, right? It explicitly says change the backend so that new numbers are saved to the database. You can make yours in a way that even without having a name put in, right, your numbers will just get saved. But I don't think that is what this question is actually trying to say, right? I think it expects us to be able to use the post request to push new new names and new numbers to the database, right? Okay, so this is what we have in the database right now. Let's go back to our front end, or let's go back to the instruction. Okay, so we've been able to achieve these two, right? Now the third one says at this stage you can ignore whether there is already a person in the database with the same name as the person you are adding. So that means that if you try to push in a name that already exists in the database, the the application should allow us do that, and the application should not complain that such name is already existing in the database. So currently, I think if we try to add a name with that already exists in the database, I think this application is going to alert us and would not allow us to save such name. So let's copy John Tim here as a new input with a different name. Let's assume that 2 different people are bearing the same name, and then let's click on add. So it says John Tim is already added to the phone book. So we can see that John Tim is not added here anymore because it's already existing here, right? So the current stage of this application is not going to allow us to save the same name that already exists in the database. But this exercise says we should ignore that, or we can ignore that. I think it is optional. But let's see how we can ignore it, right? So here is what we can do. In this step 9 of the phone book in part 2, right, we can see that there's a logic we have here. Um, okay, where is step 9? Okay, under the SRC app.jsx. All right, so here we can see that at this point here, it says if name exists, you should alert that this name is already added to the phone book, right? So I think this is the part which we need to ignore, right? So when we comment on this part here, this should allow us to be able to save even if a name already exists in the database. Now we've commented this out. Let's go back to the front end and see if this works. All right, so let's refresh this. let's paste John Tim that we copied earlier, then with the number 09 dash, let's say 786. Let's click or let's push add. All right, now John Tim has been added to the database now without complaining that it already exists. Now, to be very sure about that, let's go to the database and let's refresh. We should be getting 1 out of 5 now. Okay, here we have 1 out of 5. So here we can see that we have John Tim in 2 places here, but with different contacts, signifying that these are 2 different entries, right? Okay, I think we've gradually come to the end of this exercise. Let's be very sure we've been able to solve this first one, this second one, and the third one. Okay, so at this point, I think I might just have to uncomment this again because for future usage, right, I might have to uncomment it. But the main thing is we understand what is and what is not, right? Okay, I'll simply just leave it this way, right? So with this, I believe we've been able to get 1 or 2 things. And if you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. You can as well share this video also. All right, so see you in the next video. Bye.